Being vulnerable is one of the most challenging feelings we can experience, and it's also the most powerful one because it determines the quality of our emotional health. When we speak of emotional health, we are referring to the energy system all humans possess. Our emotional body is the gateway through which our mental body experiences thoughts, and our physical body can create and experience a world of matter. This non-physical part of us is composed of our aura or electromagnetic field that surrounds every living being and various meridians at its core inside our physical body, including the main known chakras. This energy system does have a physical manifestation, and we often refer to as the nervous system. The nervous system is our body's command center, whose purpose is to receive, store, process, and share information between different systems in our bodies using electrical and chemical signals. Even before we are born, we begin gaining access to this system through our first energy center, also known as the root chakra. As the gateway to our physical body, this foundational energy center is the first to come up online and is responsible for all life themes related to survival and safety. Remember when we said that we all have the same underlying need to belong, be seen, be heard, and to matter? These are essential qualities that validate our existence. They make us real. They convey the I am here, I exist on purpose, which means our life depends on meeting these emotional states. As such, our root chakra houses all of our childhood memories, traumas, ancestral wounds, and beliefs. The information stored in this first chakra informs the emotional bonds we establish in childhood through our second chakra, the sacral, and create an attachment template for our emotional connection in future relationships, ensuring our safety and survival. Until about 2 years old, our focus is solely on being attuned to our survival needs. Our energy is channeled to perfect our communication skills to attune our caregivers to us because we depend on them to satisfy those needs. Yet, as we grow and our consciousness expands through activating subsequent chakras, our ego comes online. Our ego sits on the third chakra or solar plexus and begins taking shape according to the information it receives from the previously activated chakras. This activation manifests by experiencing ourselves separate from others. This doesn't mean we become aware of the experience of our caregivers or anyone around us for that matter. It just means we begin seeing others as individuals, and in doing so, we begin individualizing ourselves too, by forming things like an identity and later on, in early adolescence, developing a personality. At this point, we still see everything around us as an extension of ourselves rather than seeing ourselves as an extension of everything around us. Here is where our experiences become more complex. Until the solar plexus gets activated, our understanding of the world is solely realized through our inner and outer senses, how we feel things and how we feel ourselves. We don't have an understanding of our hunger, or our diapers being soiled, or our need to be held or rocked to sleep. All we experience is feeling comfortable or uncomfortable to various degrees, and we learn to communicate those states by deploying specific sounds such as babbling or crying our lungs out. Once our solar plexus comes online, it begins communicating with our auric field through our crown chakra, which is the gateway to our mental body. Our mental body or mind does not interpret the information in our energy system as emotions or sensory perceptions, but rather it translates the data it receives into thoughts. How this data is perceived through our minds depends on what is filtered through the previously activated chakras. This means that if you had caregivers that were unable to make you feel safe during infancy, you might have developed blockages in your energy system, evolving a nervous system capable of surviving in that specific environment where that specific need was not met. So, how is this all related to empathy and self-love? Well, the solar plexus is the seat of our personal power, our willpower, and our sense of self. It is this is me in the world. I am powerful. I have value. I have something to add to this world. I am a distinct view of the universe, and I am here to share that expression that is me with the world. Just like a muscle, the ego gets reinforced through exposure and repetition. When exposed to a dysfunctional environment habitually, we learn to navigate those deviations by creating coping mechanisms. We learn to tune out our feelings and tune in to our environment. The problem is not how we feel, but that we feel unsafe to feel what we feel, so we deny it. This is what traumatizes most of us, not what happens to us, but what happens within us. In other words, we normalize trauma as self-hatred, self-abandonment, and victimhood. Our personal power starts in the non-physical parts of us, which is then interpreted by the egoic mind. This is how the mind creates thoughts, beliefs, and feelings, which then feeds back into the nervous system, training it to adapt to its environment by limiting our experiences. Disempowering thoughts, beliefs, and feelings lower our personal frequency by stifling access to the information already stored in our electromagnetic or energy field. We experience this resistance as physical or emotional pain, judgment, lack of empathy, dissociation, and overall disconnection. If our capacity to stand in our own truth is determined by our self-confidence, or how well we accept and trust ourselves and believe in our own abilities and skills, our personal power tells us how we can use that self-confidence to influence our environment. As such, our egoic mind will project our self-esteem onto the outer world to inform us of whether and how we appreciate and value ourselves and others. As a concept, this projection will be made on the spectrum of empathy that runs from cognitive or rational empathy to vulnerable or affective empathy. Whether it's a cognitive understanding, an empathetic concern, or an affective response to someone else's experience, empathy happens when we're able to step outside of our frame of reference to view someone else's experience through theirs, their journey, their emotional tools, their support system, their beliefs. Empathy is often described as the ability to understand another person's situation, feelings, or viewpoint without actually experiencing it yourself. It does not include judging those feelings, and it's not sympathy or compassion, although compassion is required to hold space for someone else's experience. Think of it this way. Self-compassion is the judgment-free zone you hold in yourself to explore your experience, your suffering, to feel your feelings, and to observe how the situation is impacting you and how you're responding to it. When you extend this space of compassion to others, you are extending empathy. You can practice cognitive empathy by thinking of someone else's experience as if it was your own. But that limits your understanding of their situation because you're conceptualizing their experience through yours. It's a if I were you situation, but you're not, because you do not have the same experiences, feelings, opportunities, challenges, DNA, understanding, upbringing, or relationship dynamics. If you did, you would be them. When we attempt to rationalize empathy, it can be tempting to rescue or fix things for the other person. But doing so creates a power dynamic where you no longer see another person's pain as an equal. Instead, you act from an intellectual high ground by showing sympathy. And sympathy is a narcissistic trait that often takes away the other person's self-efficacy by drowning them in self-pity, the breathing ground for a victim mentality. You can use cognitive empathy to conceptualize someone else's point of view, but you won't actually see or feel them. This is where affective empathy comes in. We tend to empathize more easily with people that look like us or share similar experiences. As an experience, empathy is nothing more than an emotional awareness scale. On one end, you'll find people experiencing a very shallow, if non-existent, connection to and understanding of their emotional body. These are the people often referred to as psychopaths. Close to them are the narcissists, followed by the sensitives in the middle, and on the opposite end, we encounter the empaths. Here's something interesting. Did you know that we're all born sensitives, but limit or expand our emotional awareness as a coping mechanism to survive various forms of emotional abuse or neglect in our childhood? Remember that trauma is an adaptation our nervous system goes through to ensure our survival in a dysfunctional environment. And even our parents' trauma can leave a chemical imprint that alters our biology. Since our genes' behavior is dependent on our environment, responses that trigger this activation, such as any distressing experience, overwhelms our ability to cope, diminishes our self-expression, and determines our capacity to feel a full range of emotions. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in our early childhood. Most of us have developed a sense of powerlessness because when we were young, our nervous system couldn't deploy its fight or flight mode. We were dependent on our caregivers for survival, so we were left with the options to respond by freezing or fawning. Some of us learned to shut down our connection to our emotional body, and in doing so, we cloaked it under specific behaviors. The development of narcissistic traits is, for instance, the result of neglect or excessive appraisal. In many situations, this self-structure arose from inadequate warmth, approval, and excessive idealization, where parents did not see us or accepted us as we were as children. Narcissists may seem like they sit in their personal power, but the truth is that narcissism is an overcompensation for low self-esteem by using an avoidance strategy for pain. Shame is often the central emotional experience for the narcissist, and their self-concept is scripted to avoid it. Behaviors that fall under the categories of grandiosity, entitlement, and lack of empathy obscure how these patterns are responses to specific emotional experiences. Most narcissists have developed the habit of rationalizing their behavior. This is how their inflated egoic mind self-corrects for a diminished sense of self, desperately in need of being actualized. Unfortunately, narcissists will never search for ways to heal their wounds because they're unaware of them. And as we have said many times, we cannot change what we're not aware of. Narcissistic people do not really lack empathy as much as their vulnerability and need for self-protection severely limit their freedom to express it. They become highly selective in deploying their intellectual knowledge of your experiences or cognitive empathic skills in an attempt to bypass feeling all the feelings that come with connecting to someone else. Narcissists don't really search for the content that we offer, but if you just so happen to identify with some of the mentioned narcissistic traits and want to dip your toes in these emotional waters, begin by asking yourself, what are the behaviors that break the connection with those around you? And what expressions disconnect you from your environment? Aim to explore all of the defense mechanisms, the gaslighting, the shifting the blame, the rationalization or justification, to avoid feeling your pain and process your feelings effectively. If all of this sounds like too much, then we suggest a simple exercise to carefully listen to someone you care about without interruption and then paraphrasing what has been said. This can feel quite challenging for you, but it's also a good start to begin tapping into your personal power. Another way our trauma response may evolve our empathetic skills is through hyper-attunement. This is the opposite of narcissism. Becoming an empath is the result of caregiving that was either unresponsive or inconsistent in satisfying our needs as infants. Some of us developed a deep awareness of our environments and learned to read the vibe of a room, identify social cues, and become vigilant of our caregivers' moods. If empathy is the quality someone can develop to put themselves in someone else's experience in order to understand the situation and feelings associated with that person's frame of reference, the empath takes this one step further. Empaths can get so attuned to everything that is happening around them that they'll even pick up on other people's emotions. If untrained, this emotional or affective empathy can have a damaging effect. As an empath, if you are around someone who cannot handle their own unsettling emotions, you're more prone to enter a state of empathic distress, fatigue, and even burnout. In fact, this is one of the biggest traps for empaths. When you enter a room, you gravitate towards the upsetting energies and will attempt to change them in order to feel safe. And if you can't, you'll take on that upset. Vicarious trauma is real for you, and repeated exposure to other people's traumas can change how you view yourself and the world. This is also very apparent when you're around narcissists. If a need is a desire to experience its opposite, you likely find yourself around narcissistic people because you are a vibrational match to their distress. There might be unhealed wounds within you that are resonating or being reinforced in this dynamic. Familiar patterns such as giving your power away, which traps you in the victim mentality. Porous boundaries, where you notice the narcissist's deepest insecurities, but because it feels familiar to you from past trauma, you normalize their abuse. Negative self-talk, where their criticism is internalized and keeps you in the relationship. Their needs always take precedent over yours. Or lack of self-esteem, fueled by a love-bombing phase where the narcissist will put you on a pedestal and satisfy all of your needs. And because your needs were never met this way, you'll fear losing this connection. And I don't mean losing a connection with them, but with how you see yourself through their adoration and their eyes. Even though we all know that this phase doesn't last, and you will soon find yourself being gaslit because you haven't nurtured a relationship with yourself in the first place. As very sensitive people have developed the ability to tap into and even absorb others' emotional experience, often unconsciously, empaths are highly aware of all emotions, theirs and others, and this makes it challenging for them to distinguish between what belongs to them and what they pick up from others. As adults, empaths usually turn into people pleasers, always trying to fit into other people's frame to feel safe. This is the consequence of enmeshment. In fact, the fundamental difference between being empathetic and being an empath comes down to personal boundaries. When our attunement is directed at everything that is happening around us, we lose contact with our bodies. And the thing is, you cannot tap into your own personal power if you're not present in your physical body. Just like when you're hungry, you reach for food, feeling overwhelmed and tired are your body's cues that your needs are attempting to heal. Since you take on others' emotional experiences, you need to learn how to create your own container. Get familiar with what feels good to you beyond what is familiar to you. Your own frame of what is you and uniquely you and what belongs to others. To feel empowered in your own energy instead of feel shamed for your sensitivity. Own every emotion you feel, even if you think it does not belong to you. Bring your hands to your heart, welcome it fully, and transmute its energetic imprint. So for instance, say you feel sadness. Acknowledge the sadness with no resistance. Bring it to your heart and imagine purifying it with fire and shifting it to the next better feeling energy available to you, which can be gratitude, joy, or simply inner peace. Embodying yourself will bring harmony into your being, yet you ought to reprogram the stress and negative expectations that come with the feelings of powerlessness you nurture through your habits and interactions. When you create your life from a place of conscious choice, you can choose with who and in which environments you wish to interact with, and you can choose how you will interact with the energies that come your way. You can transmute the denser ones and absorb the pleasant ones. You can choose to influence the energy or be influenced by the energy because you're an alchemist. Being emotionally sensitive can be a challenge in the ever-connected world we live in, but having access to an enormous emotional range doesn't mean you're fragile. Quite the contrary. Your sensitivity is resilience that becomes a superpower when you're clear on where you end and others begin. This is why empathetic people have the strongest boundaries, because when you know yourself, you can be present for all that you are. And when you stand in your personal power, you can extend that love to others. Have a good week.